Thank you, Rabbi Stephen. Our talk this morning is in memory of Benji Needham, and we wish all the family Chaim Aruchim. Please God, please God. I'd like to speak today on someone who was well known in Eastern Europe, but his name is slowly being forgotten, as it were. His name was Eliyahu Chaim Meisel. He was born in Horodok, just outside Volozhin, on the 9th of Sivan in 1821. And at his Brit, he was called Eliyahu in memory of the Vilna Gaon, who had passed away 24 years before, and in memory of Chaim Volozhiner, who had passed away when the little baby was 5 days old. When he was 8, Eliyahu Chaim had learned so much already from home that he entered Volozhin Yeshiva. And he entered the same time, if you remember, I spoke last time about Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. He entered the same year. And Eliyahu Chaim was eight years old. When he was 13, he was married, exactly the same as Nenetziv at that age. They got married, early 19th century. But it so happened that in his bar mitzvah year, his fame had spread around the surrounding areas. And Reb Yaakov Mikarlin, who was a prime disciple of the Chaim Volozhiner, came to the home in Horodok to test him, to see if it was true that he was such a learned youngster. And when he realized how much he knew, Reb Chaim Karlin gave him samicha on the spot, 13 years of age. When he was 19, on the recommendation of Reb Yitzchak Volozhiner, who was the head of Volozhin Yeshiva, he was appointed the Rabbi of his hometown, Horodok. Very unusual. But 2 years later, he resigned because he wanted to devote himself full-time to learning, which he did for another 10 years. Then, in 1853, he took the position in Dresden. I don't know if you can picture Lithuania, but in the south of Lithuania, just south of where Volozhin Yeshiva was, and where he himself was born, there's a town there called Dresden, and there he became the Rav. And there was an interesting incident that happened while he was there. An inspector of schools came along, and he was anti-Jewish. He came into the Talmud Torah, he took hold of a siddur, and he ripped it in pieces. What did Eliyahu Chaim do? He took the siddur, opened it at the page where it said the prayer for the Tsar, he took it to the authorities, and he had the man severely punished because he was slighting the Tsar and his family. So that shows the strength of conviction of this young rabbi. His next position was in Pruzin, which was just south of where he had been before. And while he was there, this was in the late 1850s, early 1860s, there was an outbreak of cholera. You might know that cholera was endemic in Europe, including this country, throughout the 19th century. It was water, drinking water, that was contaminated with impurities, including effluent. People got ill and they died from it. What did this Rabbi Eliyahu Chaim Meisel do? He nursed as many of these people as he could. In spite of the fact that it could have meant his own life, he was willing to take the risk. And for this, he became famous. Let me go on now. After being in Dresden and in Pruzin, his next community was in Lomza. You might know Lomza was on the border of Lithuania and Poland in those times, had a big Hasidic community, but he was a big mitnaged Lithuanian rabbi who towered over them in his learning. And in Lomza, there was the difficulty in those times, you would know, of boys being drafted into the Tsarist army. And if they were, it was for 10, 20, 25 years, and they would be sent to the remotest parts of Russia, where tragically they would lose their Yiddishkeit. In his time in Lonza, apart from as he did in each of the communities he was in, where he set up an old age home, an orphanage, a Talmud Torah, and a hospital, here he was confronted with young people who were going to be taken far away from home. But the Tsarist regime had set a provision that if a certain amount of money was paid for, say, 50 boys to be exempted from the army, then it would happen. The amount could vary between 600 and 1,000 rubles, which was a huge amount of money. So what did the rabbi do? He would go to the Gevirim, the rich people, and he would say to them, please contribute as much as you can. And eventually the huge amount was made up. But this had to go on throughout his career in Lonza. There was one particular time when it was towards Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and the amount had not been guaranteed. He went to shul on Kol Nidra night, and he said, we will not begin the Kol Nidra service until the whole amount has been guaranteed. And of course, because of the reputation of the Rav, so it was. But this was a danger, though in that time, as you might know, the boys could lose all their Judaism completely. From there, his last position was in Lodz. Lodz was the commercial and textile center of Poland, as I think it still is today. And he, as I say, in each of his communities, if there wasn't one there already, he looked after the orphans and the widows. Sometimes he would stand with them under the chuppah because he wanted to protect them and make sure that they had a good life. And if there wasn't a hospital, he would make sure there was one, an old age home the same time, and certainly a Talmud Torah for those people who worked during the day. When they came home at night, they would have somewhere to live. He actually, while he was in Lodz, he heard about the reputation of Samson Raphael Hirsch in Germany. And he traveled there to Frankfurt in the 1880s while the Rav was still alive to meet him, to talk with him, and to realize his greatness in what he was doing for German Jewry. In 1894, there was a very severe outbreak of cholera. And what did he do this time? He put on his kittel, talus and tefillin, and he sat outside the Beit HaKabarot, outside the Jewish cemetery, and he prayed to Hashem, and he said, Hashem, spare my people, including the non-Jewish people in Lodz. If you need to take somebody, take me. It so happened that miraculously, soon after, the plague, the disease abated, and people's lives were spared. And from then onwards, they said, not only was he a great Talmid Chacham, but he was a malach, and he was a tzaddik, and he was revered for the rest of his life while he was in Lodz. He actually lived till he was a month before his 91st birthday, and he passed away in the middle of the month of Iyar, 1912. He lived a long, long, fruitful life. What became of, he was one of those Rabbanim who wrote a lot. What became of his manuscript writings? Tragically, they were given, not tragically, they were given into the possession of his grandson. But exactly 30 years after he passed away, after the rabbi passed away in 1942, you will know that the Lodz ghetto they were all rounded up by the Nazis and they were taken away to the death camps. The grandson was taken away and the writings were destroyed. So all we have now is the memory of this great rabbi who in each of his communities did so much for them, including those cholera outbreaks. And his memory was revered, and I wanted to bring him to your attention because he was an outstanding personality in his time. Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his memory be a blessing.
Has anyone got any? Meisel, Rabbi Meisel.
Yes. Who have both those surnames are related to each other. You know people who are. Right, right. Yeah, probably they are the same relation.
My grandson.
Yeah, yeah, well, there you are. So probably they are the same. Yes, yes.
Finland. No?
No.
No? Okay, I heard this some years ago. It's a wonderful story. We were talking about Jews being hurled into the Russian army for 25 years. So there was a group of 10 Jews
Yes.
who happened to remain from, and they all got their release from the Russian army after 25 years. So you served 25 years, Russian government allowed you to choose somewhere to live. So these 10 young men decided to receive a plot of land in the Russian protectorate, now known as Finland. And they went and set themselves up as a kahilla. And after they'd built themselves homes, they wrote back to the home they came from. And they said, we are 10 young Orthodox Jews seeking 10 women prepared to come and join us, be our wives. And what happened was they got 10 women who came along and they each married, and it was all done by lottery. Couldn't choose. And this is the founding of Jewish community in Finland.
Okay, we're going to I'll say goodbye to those on Zoom, and then we will. Right.